Fit to breathe, Beijing blanketed by another round of noxious air, the fourth time this month. South Korea says all preparations for the launch of its homegrown space rocket are complete. UN Arab League mediator Lakhdar Brahimi pleads with the Security Council for consensus, saying Syria is being ripped apart. And US President Barack Obama lays out a series of immigration policies aimed at fixing a system he describes as broken. Ni hao, thanks for joining us for this update of CCTV News. We're here for the next 60 minutes with the latest news from China and around the world. This is NewsHour. I'm Edwin Ma in Beijing. The fourth bout of heavy smog in as many weeks has enveloped the capital, Beijing. Visibility in central areas of the city has reduced to an average of 800 metres. Parts of the city's second and third ring roads have seen slow-moving, heavy traffic. The municipal government has put emergency measures into place to combat the pollution. 30% of state-financed vehicles are being kept off roads, and a number of highly polluting companies have been forced out of business. The smog has caused an increase in the number of people seeking hospital treatment for respiratory problems and prompted calls for legislation to curb pollution. Health experts are advising the public to reduce outdoor activities and to keep windows closed. Statistics show car emissions account for 22% of pollution in the capital, with industrial emissions making up for 18%. Construction site dust and debris also is providing 16% of the pollution, while an estimated 25% emanates from outside the city. The Beijing municipal government has proposed air pollution prevention regulations in an attempt to secure a long-term solution to the problem. Officials are now soliciting opinions from the public. Regulations currently focus on a hard cap for a company's emissions.
A highlight of the legislation is a limit on the total amount of emissions. We will first have an evaluation on the required amount of emissions by each company, and then issue emission permits. If companies fail to follow the permitted amounts,
submitted on ways of cutting down air pollution. The Korea Space Launch Vehicle 1, or NARO, is scheduled to blast off from the NARO Space Center in Gohyeo County, about 485 kilometers south of the capital, Seoul. The carrier rocket is due to be launched at 3:55 p.m. local time Wednesday. NARO 1 has been in launch position at the Space Center since Monday. With a Russian-built first stage and a South Korean-built second stage, the rocket underwent final preparations on Tuesday. The exact launch time will be confirmed in about 30 minutes from now. South Korea has invested $478 million in the NARO project. Two previous launches ended in failure. If today's launch succeeds, South Korea will be the 13th country to send a satellite into orbit from its own territory. So to get the very latest, we're joined by our correspondent Eugene Jung, who's at the NARO Space Center in South Korea. Welcome, Eugene. How are these preparations going, and what's the important thing, of course, like we've been discussing here in Beijing, but where you are also, the significance of the weather is a vital point, isn't it, as far as the launch is concerned?
Well, good afternoon from NARO Space Center, Edwin. All stages of the preparation seem to be going smoothly here at the NARO Space Center. The Space Agency and Science Ministry announced this morning that the launch committee started their meeting about 2 hours ago to decide upon today's launch time. There are still a number of factors that need to be considered, such as the weather, the possibility of the satellite crashing into other space objects, and the situation in space during the launch window between 3:55 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. local time today. The committee will soon announce their decision on the exact launch time at 1:30 p.m. local time. That's in about 20 minutes or so. You also asked about the weather. It's very sunny here in Kuhung today, but skies aren't entirely clear. The weather agency says it will get cloudier as the sun sets. The weather forecast hasn't changed much since yesterday. The Korea Aerospace Research Institute, in charge of the launch, said that this kind of weather will probably not impact the launch, so it's most likely that they will stick to the 4 p.m. launch time today. Edwin?
And Eugene, we've mentioned the fact that it has a Russian-built first stage and a South Korean-built second stage, but just to explain to us what the significance is of this Naro-1 launch for South Korea.
Well, the local media here are quite hyped about the fact that if South Korea succeeds in sending its satellites into space, then the country will become the 11th member of the elite global space club. Now, this membership already includes other Asian countries like China, Japan, India, and the DTRH, who recently joined the rank in December with the Unha-3 rocket and Kwangmyeong-sung satellite. But some say even this claim may be controversial because in order to join the elite space club, South Korea needs to develop the rocket with its own technology. However, as you just mentioned, the first stage of the Naro-1 rocket was built by the Russians. So even if the two other conditions, like putting up their own satellites in space and using and firing off from its own territory, even though those two conditions are met, we can't say for sure whether South Korea will fulfill all three conditions to join this space club. But, I mean, above all else, this launch has been the hopes of many people in Korea, and a very expensive one, too, costing almost $480 million US. And this will be the last attempt for Naro, so it's utmost important for South Korea that it succeeds. Edwin? Indeed.
All right, Eugene, many thanks indeed for updating us there. That's Eugene Jung, our correspondent, who's at the launch site now. Well, this third attempt to send Naro into space has many people, of course, expressing their views as to why, and some experts are saying that military concerns may be a reason behind the launch.
South Korea is competing with Japan and eagerly wants to secure its position in East Asia. Although joint military exercises between the U.S., Japan and South Korea began 4 years ago, the U.S.-South Korea alliance has never been at its core. South Korea wants to narrow the gap, and space development is key to this.
South Korea and the U.S. have reaffirmed that the two allies will adhere to their plan to transfer Washington's wartime operation control over South Korean troops to Seoul by the end of 2015. Even though South Korea will get intelligence support from the U.S. and Japan, it still needs a comprehensive intelligence system of its own. A space-based information system will certainly help it to achieve this goal.
This is NewsHour here at CCTV, and in the stories still to come. UN Arab League mediator Lakhdar Brahimi pleads with the UN Security Council for consensus, saying Syria is being ripped apart. And US President Barack Obama lays out a series of immigration policies aimed at fixing a system he describes as broken. The UN Arab League mediator Lakhdar Brahimi says Syria is being destroyed bit by bit and has called on the UN Security Council to take swift action. He made the statement at a briefing to the Security Council on Tuesday.
The Council has got to reaffirm the attachment and support for Syria's independence, sovereignty, territorial integrity, also for the rights of every citizen in Syria to their human rights and dignity, irrelevant of gender, religion, or any other element.
Brahimi said to the Council that efforts to end the 22-month-old conflict made no progress in the last 2 months. He added that Syria is being pushed into a situation that's extremely dangerous and which has serious implications for the rest of the international community. Diplomats say Brahimi has grown extremely frustrated at the inability of the Security Council to unite behind him. His predecessor, former UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan, voiced similar frustration when he resigned last August. And to solve the increasingly serious humanitarian crisis in Syria, international aid officials are framing their latest gathering in Kuwait. The urgency for a dramatic increase in international relief funds for Syria, seeking total pledges of $1.5 billion will be the central message for today's meeting led by the UN. Earlier, we spoke with our correspondent Nathan King in New York, and he gave us more details about this event.
This will be the widest gathering so far of international journalists. Remember, Syria is split along fault lines, largely between west and east in terms of the conflict. But countries will come together, it looks like, in Kuwait to try and make some sort of pledges for humanitarian assistance. So that is good news. The problem all along in this conflict when it comes to humanitarian access is that many countries have chosen sides. They are feeding their money directly to either the government or the Syrian opposition. They haven't gone through the international aid agencies, and also the international aid agencies have had problems with access. But as we've just said about this refugee crisis, in the words of the humanitarian chief of the refugee agency, the High Commission of Refugees, there's now an unrelenting flow of refugees coming across the border, not just to Jordan, but also more in Turkey and increasingly in Iraq and Egypt. 200,000 in the last 2 months, 700,000 in total now, and the number increasing every day. So what this is designed to do is to increase the amount of money that's going to flow to these Syrians as this crisis worsens. Whether we'll get there or not is another question.
Nathan King there in New York. The chief of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees in Jordan has told CCTV that he expects the number of Syrian refugees in the country to double by the middle of the year. More than 300,000 are already there, and in recent days thousands more have crossed into Jordan, a country with a long history of taking in people in need. But with no foreseeable end to the fighting in Syria, what will become of the refugees in Jordan? Our correspondent Rory Ruttenberg has this story.
This is what most people imagine a refugee camp looks like, a temporary solution to a temporary problem. This is Zatari camp in northern Jordan, now hosting more than 60,000 Syrian refugees. And this is Wahidat camp in the Jordanian capital Amman. The tents that were once here have long since turned into permanent structures. Those living here are Palestinians who arrived following Israel's independence in 1948 and stayed ever since. And they have Jordanian citizenship.
We have become one community here, and we have rights, just like the Jordanians themselves.
Jordan annually spends hundreds of millions of dollars, most of it on infrastructure, education and subsidies, hosting refugees from the region.
If you look around Jordan at the moment, you've got Iraq, you've got Syria, you've got the occupied Palestinian territories, you've got, there's a lot of issues in the region which makes the stability of Jordan particularly attractive.
But some, like the 250,000 Iraqis who live in areas like this one, actually provide a net gain for Jordan's economy. This is Amman's Rabia neighborhood, among the capital's wealthiest. Many rich Iraqis, most of whom fled after 2003, run many successful businesses here and pay lots of money in taxes. But unlike the Palestinians, the Iraqis, even those who arrived in earlier waves after 1958 and 1991, don't qualify for Jordanian citizenship. Much to their chagrin, they are still classified as guests.
There is no any rights for them as refugees. Second, they treated them as individuals, not as a community. And the Jordanian government refused any kind of organization for Iraqis.
So what does this mean for the future of Syrians now in Jordan?
The Jordanian government does not necessarily want to change their status to anything more permanent than providing them with temporary protection. So at this point, that's all we're doing.
But with the UN expecting hundreds of thousands more to arrive by mid-year, Jordan may say that today but find itself facing a new reality tomorrow. Roe Rettenberg, CCTV, at the Zatari camp in northern Jordan.
Now to Egypt, and protesters played football and danced in the streets in the cities of Ismailia and Suez on Tuesday night in a show of defiance against a curfew imposed by President Mohamed Morsi. In Suez, many shops and stores were open after the curfew had officially started, and there was still traffic on the streets. Morsi declared a state of emergency and a curfew in the Suez Canal cities of Port Said, Suez and Ismailia in a television address on Sunday. The curfew was declared following riots in Port Said after a court convicted and sentenced to death 21 defendants for a mass football riot in the city's main stadium a year ago. Residents in all three cities have flouted the restrictions since they came into force on Monday night, holding mass demonstrations. The protesters are angry over what they say are moves by Morsi and the Islamist Muslim Brotherhood to monopolise power and their failure to address the country's multiple woes. And a new round of Egyptian national dialogue has failed to reach consensus on forming a national salvation government, a key demand of the opposition coalition National Salvation Front. President Mohamed Morsi's advisor, Bakanam al-Shakwi, said forming such a government is not in the interests of Egyptians. Al-Shakwi told reporters on Tuesday that the process will be lengthy and will affect citizens' daily lives. She stressed the dialogue focused on mechanisms necessary to implement what would be agreed on by all participants. The opposition coalition, the National Salvation Front, boycotted the dialogue on Tuesday. It says forming a national salvation government is its main precondition for talks. Al-Shakwi said 15 parties participated in the latest dialogue, and she noted that the presidency was expecting more parties and political forces to attend. Well, the latest wave of clashes in Egypt has come at a time when the government is facing major economic challenges and trying to attract foreign investors back to the country. At stake are badly needed loans and grants from the IMF and other institutions. Our correspondent Yasser Hakan takes a look at the extent to which the political divisions have affected the economic plans.
January 25th was supposed to be a day of celebration, but for the government and businesses, it became another nightmare of continuous violence, hindering economic development.
I don't think we should talk about economy now. Politics is overshadowing economic development. The problem is that the president's decision since he took office has divided the country and created lots of political enemies and not competitors. The result is that everyone is discussing the political issues and forgetting the economy. It's been the same in the last 2 years.
Indeed, the economy took a backseat recently. According to government figures, tourism has been hit by a 23% drop in the last 2 months. The Egyptian pound has reached another low of 6.7 per dollar, and the budget deficit is nearing a record $35 billion. This time, violence has also reached the port cities of Suez and Port Said.
Around 35% of Egypt's trade goes through those two port cities. There is no logic in imposing a curfew there. You will lose billions of dollars. The Suez Canal brings in an annual income of around $10 billion. You are jeopardizing this huge amount. Egypt has been running after the IMF for 2 years for only $4.8 billion. That's less than half the income of the Suez Canal.
Even the $4.8 billion that should have been secured by the IMF next month seem to be a long way off.
The IMF message was clear in the last meeting. We want to see stability in Egypt and public acceptance to the economic program. I don't expect the loan to be scrapped because Egypt has enough assets to guarantee the loan, but it could be postponed and more strict conditions could be added by the IMF.
What is harder at the current climate, experts say, is to achieve public consensus on the expected tough austerity measures.
There will be increase in taxes, cuts in subsidies to reduce public expenditure, and more drops on the value of the currency. These measures will be painful on the people, so the leadership needs the opposition on its side in order to garner public support. In the current circumstance, it looks impossible.
That is why the government has sent a request to the IMF to extend the agreed-upon economic program to 2015 fiscal year instead of 20 months from this January.
What experts are demanding from the president in order to retain security and concentrate on economic development are 3 steps. First, he will have to refrain from any more decisions or policies that create chaos and divisions within the country. Second, he should extend a hand of peace to the opposition. And third, he should announce in total transparency Egypt's economic plan and austerity measures. This is Yasser Hakim for CCTV, Cairo.
The U.S. Senate has voted and approved Democratic Senator John Kerry as President Barack Obama's new Secretary of State. The vote was 94.3. 94-3, I should say, so he certainly made his mark there. Once sworn in, Kerry will replace Hillary Clinton, who's stepping down after 4 years. The vote came just hours after the Foreign Relations Committee approved his nomination by voice vote. Kerry has led the committee for the past 4 years. The 69-year-old is a decorated Vietnam veteran and the 2004 Democratic presidential candidate. And one day after 8 members of the U.S. Senate announced their immigration reform proposal, President Obama has laid out his own. Jessica Stone's been following both proposals from the White House.
Saying now is the time to fix the nation's broken immigration system, U.S. President Barack Obama lent support to the immigration reform proposals made by 8 U.S. senators Monday.
So at this moment, it looks like there's a genuine desire to get this done soon, and that's very encouraging.
The senators' proposal would make a path to citizenship for undocumented workers conditional on a federal government crackdown on employers employing illegal immigrants and a plan to heighten security along U.S. borders.
The next most important step is ensure we don't repeat the mistakes of 1986, where we gave amnesty to 3 million people, promised the border would be secure, and now, of course, we are dealing with 11 million people here illegally.
The president doesn't want this linkage for the estimated 11 million undocumented workers in the United States. He also wants to permit binational same-sex couples to stay together in the U.S. under any new immigration policy, a measure that wasn't even mentioned in the Senate proposal.
We have noted that the proposed framework does not include GLBTQ families. We urge Congress and the White House to make sure that meaningful solutions to our families must be inclusive of all our families.
People feel that there's like a window of hope.
In downtown Los Angeles, about 24 people gathered to watch the president's speech, including Angela Zambrano, who works with Central American immigrants to the United States. She does not support a link between a path to citizenship and increased border enforcement.
I would have liked to hear him specifically say that he's not conditioning the adjustment of status, the permanent resident status with a path to citizenship. He's not conditioning that to border enforcement.
House Speaker John Boehner's spokesman reacted cautiously, releasing this statement, quote, "We hope the president is careful not to drag the debate to the left and ultimately disrupt the difficult work that is ahead in the House and Senate." President Obama has signaled if immigration reform hits a roadblock in the U.S. Congress, he is ready with a plan B.
And if Congress is unable to move forward in a timely fashion, I will send up a bill based on my proposal and insist that they vote on it right away.
And staying in the U.S., the tragic mass shooting at an elementary school in Connecticut has not only sparked debate over gun control, it's also turned the public's focus on safety in schools. Some say one solution to the threat of gun violence is to arm teachers so they can protect school children. CCTV's Ukenda McGay has that story.
In the wake of the Connecticut school shooting,
Fire!
Some educators are arming themselves both with information and guns.
I think that it's important for me to get prepared in case I ever do have to defend myself or my students.
Several school systems around the United States, rather than keeping guns out of school, want to bring them in. This is Mesa, Ohio.
But we believe it's the first in Ohio and probably maybe one of the first in the United States where we're going to have actually armed school teachers.
A real possibility in Texas, too, where one state leader proposed state-funded firearms training for every teacher. Meanwhile, armed officers in every school, in both the Los Angeles School District and the Plano, Texas school system.
It's the most effective way to make sure you've done everything you can to protect your campuses, and they say have an armed guard in your building.
In Fontana, California, those armed police now carry semi-automatic rifles, a move that's drawn sharp criticism.
I've been against having armed police officers in our middle schools and high schools all along.
These school security changes can even be seen on the university level. In fact, new restrictions implemented the second week of January here on USC's campus are being called unprecedented. The once open campus closes all but 8 entrances at night. Security gates and guarded checkpoints greet visitors. After-hours access granted only to students, faculty, staff, and pre-registered guests.
Additional security officers, additional technology in the form of cameras, and the campus restrictions between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. are the 3 new security components implemented on the University Park campus.
New school security implementations, something Americans are increasingly seeing and worrying about. Yukenta McGahee, CCTV, Los Angeles.
And just ahead on this edition of News Hour. Northern Ireland's city of Belfast struggles to claw back business it lost in the recent protests. And Microsoft releases a new version of its flagship software suite aimed at mobile devices. Now we're returning to our story about the launch that's planned today of the Naro-1 rocket in South Korea. A news conference has just been held to announce the exact launch time. And to get the result of that, we're joined again by our correspondent Eugene Jung, who's at the Naro Space Center. So, Eugene, what is the latest that you've got? Has this launch time been confirmed?
Yes, Edwin, it was a very short news conference. They announced the final, the confirmation on the launch time. It said at 4 p.m. local time, that's 3 p.m. Beijing, and 7 GMT today. The spokesperson from the Ministry of Science came out and told reporters that all technical preparations were going smoothly. And after considering the technical situation, the weather, as well as the situation in space, they said it is fine to, they're going to push ahead with the 4 p.m. launch as planned. Now that the time has been set at 1:58 p.m., which is in about 20 minutes or so, they're going to start injecting the fuel into the rocket, and 15 minutes prior to the set launch time, the countdown, the official countdown, will begin. Edwin?
All right, Eugene, many thanks indeed. That's our correspondent, Eugene Jung in Seoul, and not in Seoul, she's at the launch center and will be with us at 3 o'clock Beijing time to bring us coverage of that launch. Now, continuing on with our other stories here on NewsHour, Northern Ireland's Belfast has been marred by protests in recent weeks. The protests were triggered by the council's decision to limit the number of days the Union flag is flown over the City Hall. Protests are damaging businesses and revenue, but as CCTV correspondent Lourdes Sexton reports, the city is now encouraging people to come back and trade.
For 8 weeks, protests and riots have become commonplace on Belfast streets, taking place in small pockets of the city, destroying property, injuring police officers and damaging business.
The City Hall behind me is where the unrest ignited. It was here that the council voted on the changing of the policy of flying the Union flag Once flown daily, it is now only flown on designated days across the hall.
Perhaps the most catastrophic effect of this decision is the impact on business, estimated at £15 million since protests began.
It has got a bit better, but the major problem is the impact that this is going to have on tourism coming into Easter, coming into the new marching season, coming into July, coming into August, when people were visiting Belfast. I mean, last year Belfast was full of tourists, was full of cruise ships, it was full of buses coming from down south, people coming from UK market. That's my biggest worry, not whether the protests have calmed down or not. It's a knock-on effect of brand Northern Ireland.
Before Christmas it was bad, now it's a crisis. We're at breaking point. We have premises down 54% last week alone. I mean, we've seen guys lose now £150,000. We're at the point, I mean, I have a company this morning, paid off 50 staff.
Backing Belfast, a major advertising campaign is now underway to support businesses and encourage people back to the city. So far, the campaign has gathered £1.5 million support.
There's been a toxic perception in the city that it's not a safe place to be. The reality of that isn't right. I mean, it is continually safe. So what we're trying to do is just encourage people and give them the support so that they feel comfortable and safe, because by and large, the issues that we've faced over the last number of weeks are very confined to a small area of our city.
While the campaign is a start, the long-term impact to Belfast's reputation and stability remains to be seen. Lourdes Sexton, CCTV, Belfast.
Well, let's look now at the business that's going on closer to home. Heidi is here. Hi there, Heidi. What have you got for us today?
I've got a bit of a market update as usual, and also we're focusing on the tech space in the US, so a couple of stories there. All right, first though, let's check in on how the markets are going across the APAC region. Equities right across this area are extending Tuesday's rally after we got some pretty mixed cues from Wall Street overnight. Investors are now training their eyes on corporate earnings, of course, but also keeping a lookout for the US Fed Reserve's policy announcements. That's expected later today when it concludes its two-day policy meeting. Now, here on the Chinese mainland, the Shanghai Composite is swinging between gains and losses all morning today. The recent rally has driven valuations in the Asian market to the highest levels in almost 9 months. The Shanghai Comp is currently trading more or less flat at the moment. Financials and tech stocks are on the way up this morning, overshadowing losses in Chinese healthcare companies. All right, let's take a look at how markets in Japan are faring today. Yoongi Kang joins us in Tokyo with the latest. Yoongi, great to see you. Earnings still in focus today, particularly in Japan. How are they moving the market today?
Well, Heidi, earnings certainly a focus here in Tokyo, and as we're hearing more from big-name companies here in Japan, investors are focusing on corporate earnings throughout this week. Now, today it was tech shares and exporters that pushed the market higher. One of them is Yahoo Japan. Now, that stock jumped more than 20%. At one point, it's now up about 17%, so big gains there. The company released its earnings report on Tuesday, and investors took some positive cues as it raised its operating profit forecast thanks to stronger advertising sales. Now, another winner today is Komatsu, the construction machinery maker, lowered its profit outlook as demand for mining equipment in Indonesia fell, but investors were actually pleased to see that stock trimmed losses to trade in positive territory. It's now quoted at 2,428, up about 1.8%. So we're seeing this global trend where investors are shifting their money from safer to riskier assets. And today, it was also the yen's softness against the dollar that helped the market as well. Players were placing orders for exporter shares. So exporters and tech shares are leading the gains here in Tokyo.
All right, Yoongi, as earnings season reaches its peak, how are players in the market investing their money? Where are they parking their cash right now?
Right, Heidi, there seems to be a lot of wait-and-see stance here in Japan still, because investors actually want to hear more from blue-chip companies. For example, Toyota and Honda, they will be releasing their results this week and next. But investors are also becoming more selective when buying shares, and part of the reason is that so far we're getting a mixed bag of strong and weak numbers. Now, analysts are forecasting a 30% rise in profit among Japanese companies in the second half of this business year, but we're actually seeing quite a few companies not able to reach that target, and that is putting a lid on the upside. Now, market watchers are saying that it might be difficult for the Nikkei average to clearly break above the key 11,000 mark. Now, just to give you a lineup of companies releasing their earnings reports later this week. Today, Canon is announcing, tomorrow is Toshiba and Honda, and finally on Friday, we will be hearing from Sharp and Panasonic. So many companies giving their important numbers later this week. Back to you.
All right, big couple of days ahead. Thanks, Yoongi Kang, joining us in Tokyo. Let's take a look at other markets around Asia. Serena Daram joins us now from Singapore with all the details. Good afternoon, Serena. Pretty good day today in Asia. All the major indices trading in the green. All right, we'll try and get back with Serena in just a moment. We don't have her at the moment. In the meantime, let's get you the current trading numbers of indices right around the region. So a pretty good day overall so far. Let's talk a little bit more about the regional markets. We'll get across to Serena Daram, who joins us now in Singapore. Hopefully we can get through to her now. Serena?
Hi there. That's right. I'm here now. Markets are eyeing the Fed monetary policy decision for any clues on if and when it will pull back from its stimulus measures. But moving down under, this is actually the best run the ASX 200 is actually having in a decade as money flows back into equities. Stocks in focus today are likely to include insurers thanks to the ongoing flood crisis in Queensland and parts of New South Wales. IAG, QBE and Suncorp will be the ones to watch, but miners with exposures to the affected areas could also be looking at costly production delays, repairs to infrastructure and damage to other assets. Today, though, miners are leading the gains on the ASX 200 with BHP Billiton and Rio Tinto both up about 1%.
All right, the Aussies outperforming again. Serena, we're going to have to leave it there, but many thanks for joining us. Serena Daram joining us in Singapore. Let's turn to the tech space now. And Microsoft has launched a new version of its Office software suite. Now, this new product features constantly updated online access to documents from all kinds of devices, laptops and tablets included. This is a bold new move by the world's largest software company to tailor-make its most profitable product to a mobile generation. Let's get you all the details.
Microsoft Office is becoming untethered. Long-used programs such as Word, Excel, Outlook, and PowerPoint, and now the Skype video calling system and a multimedia note-taking program called OneNote are cutting the cord and heading to the cloud. Microsoft knows the world has changed, and so this very consumer-friendly push is in hopes that as consumers turn more to mobile devices and tablets, they won't turn away from Windows or Office. Office 365, a subscription-based service, is ready for download globally on Tuesday, costs $100 a year, can be shared among 5 devices, and upgrades are included, marking a change from the old upgrade and pay-as-you-go policy. But protecting Office, Microsoft's most profitable product, comes down to more than just dollars and cents, says Patrick Moorhead of More Insights and Strategy.
They have had some less than stellar announcements over the last 6 months to a year. So they really need a big hit here. They need a big hit perceptually, not only with consumers, but also with the industry as a whole, to get a lot more respect back as a company in the consumer business.
At the backbone of this strategy is mobile accessibility. For example, you can work on a document on your computer at home, save it on the cloud, and then access the same document on a Windows phone or tablet. All you need is one account and one password. And that could help improve the cross-current between home and office, which is Microsoft's key market, while at the same time slowing the competitive advance of Google Docs and Google's Android-powered smartphones. Norman Young of Morningstar.
you know, we think it's helpful that they're actually moving in this direction as far as the company's strategy is concerned. In the past, you know, I think they had kind of, I don't want to say rested on their laurels, but I think they kind of looked at their market position and did not really necessarily see the danger of the competitors coming up behind them. So I think it's more important that they're there. It may take a few quarters before we see actually how successful they are.
But one more thing analysts say to watch, whether Microsoft decides to make Office 365 for the iPad. If they do, it could broaden their audience, but that could come at the expense of its struggling Surface tablet.
Yep, a catch-22 for Microsoft, and it better pay off soon. All right, that's all from me for Biz. Join us again at 4 p.m. for the latest when the markets wrap up today. In the meantime, I'm going to hand you back to Edwin for some sport headlines.
Yes, I can do that, and then I'm going to kick the ball over to the man who's going to give us all the details. So we are getting in sporting mood and mode now. Still ahead on CCTV's News Hour. It's curtains for Didier Drogba's football career in China as a Turkish football club makes a whopper of an offer. Well, it is time now for that sporting story, and more, of course, from the world of sport. Wong Dong is here. And what is this story about the whopper of an offer that we were previewing for Didier Drogba, Wong Dong?
Well, it seems to be pretty complex. It's still going on. Why don't we just start with this story, which looks to be the official end to Didier Drogba's career in the Chinese Super League. Turkish football club, say Galatasaray, announced Monday they have signed a striker to an 18-month contract. Reports claim Drogba will be paid 10 million euros for the 18-month period, plus a bonus of 15,000 euros per game he plays. Drogba joins Galatasaray after failing to reach a deal to play in Italy. Both AC Milan and Juventus were apparently interested in his services. The Côte d'Ivoire striker left Chelsea for China last year after helping the West London side to actually their first Champions League title. Currently, he is still under contract with Shenhua. The Shenhua club say the Drogba's deal with them is still valid and that they haven't violated any rules of the contract. However, there have been rumors of unpaid wages, which, if are true, may provide the out Drogba needs to make the move to the Turkish side. However, Zhu Jun, the boss of Shenhua, has other ideas. According to Zhu, his club deals with business. This club deals with business matters strictly based on FIFA rules and will continue to do so regarding Drogba's move. The club investor added Shenhua does not owe money to Drogba or Nicolas Anelka, who also joined the Shenhua team last year and still have a valid contract with the Côte d'Ivoire captain. And Drogba is currently playing for his country at the African Cup of Nations, while the controversy about his move is expected to continue until he is officially released by the Shenhua club. And Drogba joined Shanghai in June last year, and his contract was estimated to be worth more than 10 million euros per year. Drogba scored 8 goals in his 11 appearances for Shenhua, but the team struggled and only managed a 9th position finish and failed to make it to the AFC Champions League. So as you see, the story is still pretty going on, and we will definitely keep you posted on that. Now to the NBA, and the Golden State Warriors finally had a healthy team when they welcomed the return of Andrew Bogut on Tuesday night. The Australian centre marked his comeback from a 38-game absence when the Warriors travelled to Toronto to play the Raptors. Bogut hadn't played since November due to an injured ankle. The 2005 top pick looked to help Golden State earn their first victory against Eastern Conference opponents this month. His dunk put the Warriors up by 2 early, and with Bogut anchoring the defense, David Lee had 21 points. Bogut continued his good form. His one-handed dunk gave Golden State a 9-point advantage midway through the third quarter. But less than a bonus was Stephen Curry limping off later after twisting his right ankle, and he sat out the rest of the game. Bogut finished with 12 points, 8 boards, and 4 blocks in 23 minutes. Golden State pulled away with a 12-3 run in the final quarter. Harrison Barnes sealed the victory as the Warriors down the Raptors 114 to 102. And elsewhere, the Memphis Grizzlies met the Philadelphia 76ers. Jerry Bayless gave the Memphis a 3-point edge at halftime. Bayless scored a season-high 21. But Philly actually regained control midway through the third quarter. Evan Turner went in for a dunk to put the Sixers up by 2. The match continued, I should say, in a back-and-forth way. Rudy Gay buried a triple there. And Marc Gasol then had a jumper and moved Memphis up by 5 early in the final quarter. However, the Sixers came back to take the 3-point lead on a bucket by Jrue Holiday. But the Grizzlies, who had a final say, Gay scored in the paint to give the Grizzlies the 1-point edge. He added 26 points for Memphis as they held on to a 103-100 victory. Other games on Monday night, the Kings edged the Wizards. Deron Williams led the Nets past the Magic. The Bulls dumped the Bobcats. The Nuggets beat the Pacers. The Rockets took off at Utah with James Harden scoring 25 points. Now we head to the highs, and the Boston Bruins were looking to do something they haven't done in more than 2 decades. The Bostonians haven't opened a season with points in 5 straight games since the 1990 and 91 season, but could accomplish that with a victory over the Carolina Hurricanes on Monday night. The Canes beat the Bruins in all 4 meetings last year. This year was looking to be a different story as the Bees capitalized shorthanded as Brad Marchand scored. One buzz Bruins 3 minutes into the game. And then 3 minutes later, with the man advantage, Boston makes it a 2-0 as Sherrod's point shot gets through a crowd. Second period, and Carolina takes advantage of a turnover. Jeff Skinner goes up top shelf to make it a 1-goal game. Less than a minute later, Boston coughs up the puck again, and this time it is the captain Eric Stahl doing the damage. That makes it 3 apiece heading into the third. And it would remain tied till late when the Bruins apply some pressure. Carolina can't clear the puck, and David Krejci winds it in, and Boston goes up to a 5-3 victory. Also in action on Monday, Columbus edged Dallas. Chad Johnson earned his first NHL shutout in this Phoenix debut as the Coyotes beat Nashville 4-0. Edmonton defeated Carolina 4-1, and the LA Kings were able to edge past the Vancouver Canucks in a shootout. And that's all the time we have for this edition of Sports Update, and I'll be back later at 3:30 Beijing time for a detailed version of Sports Scene. Until then, back to you, Edwin.
Good on you, Wong Dong. Don't be late either. So we'll see Wong Dong later in the afternoon, of course, and also later in the afternoon at 3 o'clock Beijing time. That's in just 2 hours from now. We'll be bringing you live coverage from South Korea of the launch of the Naro rocket. That's it for this edition of News Hour. Thanks for your company. Until next time, I'm Edwin Ma. Zaijian. Emissions.
A highlight of the legislation is a limit on the total amount of emissions. We will first have an evaluation on the required amount of emissions by each company, and then issue emission permits. If companies fail to follow the permitted amounts,
submitted on ways of cutting down air pollution. The Korea Space Launch Vehicle 1, or NARO, is scheduled to blast off from the Naro Space Center in Gohyeo County, about 485 kilometers south of the capital, Seoul. The carrier rocket is due to be launched at 3:55 p.m. local time Wednesday. NARO 1 has been in launch position at the Space Center since Monday. With a Russian-built first stage and a South Korean-built second stage, the rocket underwent final preparations on Tuesday. The exact launch time will be confirmed in about 30 minutes from now. South Korea has invested $478 million in the NARO project. 2 previous launches ended in failure. If today's launch succeeds, South Korea will be the 13th country to send a satellite into orbit from its own territory. So to get the very latest, we're joined.
Cloudier as the sun sets. The weather forecast hasn't changed much since yesterday. The Korea Aerospace Research Institute, in charge of the launch, said that this kind of weather will probably not impact the launch, so it's most likely that they will stick to the 4 p.m. launch time today. Edwin?
And Eugene, we've mentioned the fact that it has a Russian-built first stage and a South Korean-built second stage, but just to explain to us what the significance is of this Naro-1 launch for South Korea.
Well, the local media here are quite hyped about the fact that if South Korea succeeds in sending its satellites into space, then the country will become the 11th member of the elite global space club. Now, this membership already includes other Asian countries like China, Japan, India, and the DTRH, who recently joined the rank in December with the Unha-3 rocket and Kwangmyeonsung satellite. But some say even this claim may be controversial because in order to join the elite space club, South Korea needs to develop the rocket with its own technology. However, as you just mentioned, the first stage of the Naro-1 rocket was built by the Russians. So even if the
by our correspondent Eugene Jung, who's at the Naro Space Center in South Korea. Welcome, Eugene. How are these preparations going, and what's the important thing, of course, like we've been discussing here in Beijing, but where you are also, the significance of the weather is a vital point, isn't it, as far as the launch is concerned?
Well, good afternoon from Naro Space Center, Edwin. All stages of the preparation seem to be going smoothly here at the Naro Space Center. The Space Agency and Science Ministry announced this morning that the launch committee started their meeting about 2 hours ago to decide upon today's launch time. There are still a number of factors that need to be considered, such as the weather, the possibility of the satellite crashing into other space objects, and the situation in space during the launch window between 3:55 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. local time today. The committee will soon announce their decision on the exact launch time at 1:30 p.m. local time. That's in about 20 minutes or so. You also asked about the weather. It's very sunny here in Kohung today, but skies aren't entirely clear. The weather agency says it will get
Not fit to breathe. Beijing blanketed by another round of noxious air, the fourth time this month. South Korea says all preparations for the launch of its homegrown space rocket are complete. UN Arab League mediator Lakhdar Brahimi pleads with the Security Council for consensus, saying Syria is being ripped apart. And US President Barack Obama lays out a series of immigration policies aimed at fixing a system he describes as broken. Ni hao, thanks for joining us for this update of CCTV News. We're here for the next 60 minutes with the latest news from China and around the world. This is NewsHour. I'm Edwin Ma in Beijing. The fourth bout of heavy smog in as many weeks has enveloped the capital, Beijing. Visibility in central areas of the city has reduced to an average of 800 meters. Parts of the city's second and third ring roads have seen slow-moving, heavy traffic. The municipal government has put emergency measures into place to combat the pollution. 30% of state-financed vehicles are being kept off roads, and a number of highly polluting companies have been forced out of business. The smog has caused an increase in the number of people seeking hospital treatment for respiratory problems and prompted calls for legislation to curb pollution. Health experts are advising the public to reduce outdoor activities and to keep windows closed. Statistics show car emissions account for 22% of pollution in the capital, with industrial emissions making up for 18%. Construction site dust and debris also is providing 16% of the pollution, while an estimated 25% emanates from outside the city. The Beijing municipal government has proposed air pollution prevention regulations in an attempt to secure a long-term solution to the problem. Officials are now soliciting opinions from the public. Regulations currently focus on a hard cap for a company's